This 96-year-old woman could no longer live in her cottage because she had to go to a care home, and so she decided to donate her home to a homeless person who was always nearby. He was desperate to have a roof over his head, and so he moved in good spirits. But what he found inside was stunning. But before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe, and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. Stephen stood in front of the house with bated breath. He could barely believe that this house was now his. He made his way inside with the key the lawyer gave him. Looking around, it immediately felt all so familiar again. Everything was as he remembered it. But there was one thing out of place that caught Stephen's attention right away. A large suitcase was lying on the table. His name was written on it. With his hands shaking, he slowly opened the suitcase and his jaw instantly dropped. "I can't believe she has done this." But to better understand Stephen's situation and what he found, a bit of backstory is required. Ellie Barnes was a 96-year-old woman living in rural Alaska. She'd grown up nearby and had never felt the need to leave. She loved the area almost as much as she loved Peter, her husband of 72 years. Ellie preferred the peace and quiet of the open land, and one of her favorite things to do was just sit on the porch with Peter when the seasons allowed. But soon, her simple life was about to be turned upside down. One day, Peter passed away unexpectedly after a short battle in the hospital. Ellie was stunned. In spite of their age, she'd never stopped to really think about what might happen if Peter died first. He'd always been the healthier of the two of them. What was she going to do without him? Unlike Ellie and Peter, their children hadn't exactly fallen in love with Alaska. They'd chosen to move far away and head south to the continental United States. Both of Ellie's daughters offered to take her in if she wanted to move to either Boston or Dallas, but Ellie couldn't stand the thought of city life. Plus, she had roots in Alaska that no one else seemed to understand. Ellie had moved to Alaska as a young child and met Peter on her first day of school. Back then, there wasn't much for two kids to do except play in their yards or ride bicycles together. Their town just wasn't that big. As they grew, Ellie dreamed about marrying Peter and starting a magnificent life together. It didn't exactly go according to plan. Once they were married, Ellie and Peter struggled to find steady work. Instead of Ellie's dream home, all they could afford was a small rancher with a single bedroom and a tiny living area. It wasn't glamorous, but they tried to make it work by saving for repairs as often as possible. The house refused to cooperate. By the time Peter passed away, it felt like the house had been patched and mended 1,000,000 times. Ellie knew that any reasonable person would have demolished it by that point, but there were too many memories to let it go. With winter coming soon, she needed help making sure that the house could survive another year of snow, but who was left to help her? Luckily, Ellie was able to get help from one of her neighbors who lived a 10-minute walk away. They'd been friendly for years, and they offered to see what they could do to keep the house in order, but there was so much to be done between the leaking roof and the damaged windows. And Ellie's neighbors had troubles of their own. Ellie's neighbors were getting up in age and couldn't do a lot of the manual labor that Ellie needed to fix the house. They also had to worry about their son, Stephen, who'd moved home with them a couple of years before after being homeless for years. Stephen hadn't exactly found Ellie's beloved town to be a welcoming place. Stephen had been trying to find a job to no avail. There were few opportunities in such a rural area, and he could never make enough to move out on his own. He hated relying on his parents for support, but without even a car, he couldn't drive farther away in search of work. He was beginning to lose hope when his fortunes finally changed. Stephen was healthy and strong enough to do a lot of the work at Ellie's house that his parents couldn't manage. He had free time on his hands and he started pitching in to help Ellie however he could. Ellie tried to pay him, but Stephen always refused. He felt that he owed her a debt. After all, the two had met under terrible circumstances. When Stephen first returned to town, everyone in the small community knew that he'd been homeless. They judged him and wouldn't give him a chance. He felt so alone. But Ellie and Peter had welcomed him immediately and pulled him out of his slump by inviting him to dinner every once in a while. He wanted to repay her kindness any way he could. He had no idea that his decision to help would change his life forever. Stephen kept taking care of Ellie in any way he could. He went grocery shopping for her, cleaned the house, and even finished the repairs. They developed an even stronger bond. Since Stephen wouldn't accept any money, she insisted on cooking him dinner and making him a new scarf from the winter. But not everyone was pleased. Stephen's parents weren't thrilled to see that their son was working for Ellie for free. He spent so much time at her house that he didn't have any left to apply for jobs. They'd been supporting him for years, and Stephen's lack of regular income was stretching their budget far too thin. Something would have to give. Finally, Stephen's parents told him that he had to choose between helping Ellie and living at home. They couldn't continue to support him if he wasn't going to make an effort to support himself. While Stephen understood, he was also surprised that his parents weren't more generous with Ellie when she had always been so kind to everyone. It was time to make a decision. Stephen told his parents that he wasn't willing to abandon Ellie. They'd spent months together, and he considered her his only friend. Stephen's parents told him to pack his things and leave. They didn't want him to be homeless again, but they didn't know what else to do. Stephen was at a crossroads. He knew that if he left town, he would have better opportunities in one of the bigger cities. That would mean leaving Ellie behind. He could still call her and catch up, but he wouldn't be there anymore. He needed to make a life for himself. He only regretted that Ellie wouldn't be such a big part of it anymore. Or so he thought. Ellie tried to get by without Stephen, but she'd come to rely on his help. She was too old to do many things for herself. Her children kept urging her to leave the house behind and move south, but she'd raised her whole family in that house. It was Peter's house, the last piece of him she had. Ellie couldn't bear to part with it, but she was beginning to believe that she wouldn't have a choice. Ellie was determined to at least give surviving alone a real chance. She went to the supermarket, kept the house clean, and tried to do some repairs herself. She kept at this for about 3 weeks before something happened that made clear to her that this was simply no longer an option. While Ellie was cleaning up in the kitchen, she tripped over a towel that she dropped on the ground. Ellie fell, and she fell hard, fracturing her hip in the process. While Ellie tried to hide this at first, her family was quickly informed by the doctor, and this was the final straw for them. They wanted Ellie to move to a retirement home close to them. Ellie had always strongly objected to this, but by this point, the reality of the situation had set in. Ellie knew that what she was attempting was foolish and dangerous, and all she was doing was making her family worried. It was time to leave the home she had stayed in for 60 years of her life. With Ellie knowing she would be moving, there was only one question left. What was she going to do with the house? Ellie knew she could try to sell the home, but it would obviously not bring in much money. Besides, there was only one person who was really entitled to it. Ellie decided to bring a lawyer in to help her make sure the transfer of the home would go smoothly. She also wanted the lawyer to inform Stephen about everything because Ellie knew that she would not be able to get a word out if she was the opener calling Stephen, and she needed everything to be made loud and clear to him. Ellie also wasn't even sure if Stephen wanted her old house, but that didn't really matter to her. But what she knew for sure was that he wanted what she left behind inside for him. See, the house was only a decoy to hide what Ellie actually wanted to give Stephen. But that had to be a surprise. When Stephen got the call from the lawyer, he was extremely surprised and somewhat unsure about what to do now. He never expected Ellie to leave the house she loved so much, let alone give it to him. What did he actually do to deserve this? Or was something else behind this? Ellie's gesture was almost too generous. Something in Stephen told him that maybe his parents had something to do with it. Could they have wanted him to live closer to home again? The more he thought about it, the less he actually wanted to live in rural Alaska again. The offer of a house was too good for Stephen to decline, even if it came with strings attached. After struggling in the big city, living on the streets and surviving odd jobs, the prospect of selling the house for cash gave him hope for a fresh start. When he accepted the offer, the lawyer mentioned one peculiar condition. Stephen had to visit the house at least once. Confused but intrigued, Stephen agreed. He tried calling Ellie to express gratitude and seek answers, but his calls went unanswered, leaving him worried about her well-being and the motives behind the gift. Determined to uncover the truth, Stephen traveled to the house the next day. Avoiding his parents, he went straight to Ellie's place, unsure of what to expect. The house seemed unchanged, but a large suitcase on the dining table caught his attention. Written in familiar handwriting, his name was scrawled across it. Inside the suitcase, Stephen found envelopes labeled with tasks he had done for Ellie and Peter over the years, for getting groceries, for fixing the gutter, and others. Each envelope contained cash, totaling an astonishing $15,000. Overwhelmed, Stephen called Ellie again. This time she answered. She explained the money was her way of repaying him for his kindness, something he had never accepted in the past. Stephen, moved to tears, thanked her for her generosity, realizing how this would change his life. With the money, Stephen relocated to Anchorage, secured an apartment, and found a steady job. Over time, he advanced professionally and met his girlfriend, with whom he now plans to start a family. His relationship with his parents also improved, and during visits to town, he would stop by Ellie's house to make repairs. He chose to rent the house to a young couple starting their own family, ensuring the home remained a source of joy. Stephen visited Ellie one final time at the retirement home, 6 months after receiving the house and money. Face to face, he expressed his heartfelt thanks to the woman who had transformed his life. Her generosity not only gave him a second chance, but also left him with memories he would cherish forever. This story reminds us of the power of kindness, gratitude, and the connections that shape our lives. Ellie's selfless act of giving not only transformed Stephen's future, but also ensured that her cherished home would continue to bring happiness to others. It's a testament to how a single gesture can ripple through lives, creating new beginnings and unbreakable bonds. What do you think about Ellie's decision? Would you have done the same in her place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an inspiring tale like this one. See you in the next video.